with Dr. Phil Gardner. My name is Michelle McWilliams, and I, along with Bruce Howard, am the co-president of SACUCA. As many of you may know, this year marks the 50th edition of the annual Trends in Campus Recruiting Survey. This year also marks Dr. Gardner's 25th year in leading the Collegiate Employment Research Institute at Michigan State University. This year's research is especially significant as we continue to experience the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on entry-level hiring and internship opportunities for our students. While I wish we could all be here this morning in person, I'm excited for our colleagues across the state of Texas to hear Dr. Gardner's insights and trends that will allow us to make more informed decisions for 2021 and beyond. As a reminder, this session is being recorded, so if you'd like to turn off your video, please feel free. Also, please mute yourself throughout the entirety of this presentation. I would also like to take a moment to thank the following people for their collaboration in making this event possible. Alex Anderson from the Central Texas Liberal Arts Career Consortium, CATLAC, Kim Satz from the Metropolitan Area Consortium of Career Centers, and Herbert Thomas from the Houston Area Consortium of Career Centers. I'd also like to thank our key collaborator, Dr. Norma Guerra-Geyer, Executive Director for Texas Career Engagement at the University of Texas at Austin. Many of you know and have worked with Norma as she has led efforts in law school career services, alumni relations, adult education career development, civic engagement, leadership initiatives, and service learning. As past president of SACUCA and NACE, we're extremely appreciative of the guidance and insight Norma has provided throughout her extensive career in the career development field. Now, without further ado, please join me in virtually welcoming Norma Guerra-Geyer.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm so excited to be here today. And Phil, we so appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining us today to share your research with the larger Texas market. You have been a devoted friend and thought leader to many of us in the career services and talent acquisition space. And we just want you to know how much we admire you and the tremendous efforts and work that you have accomplished over the years. 25, in fact, in this particular space with Siri, as Michelle indicated, to help us really think about our future and the future workforce and what our students might anticipate. For those of you who haven't had a chance to meet Dr. Phil Gardner in person, he serves as the executive director of the Collegiate Employment Research Institute at Michigan State. He's been there for more than 30 years, and he received his degrees from Whitman College and Michigan State University. His major areas of research include the transition from college to work, early socialization and career progression in the workplace, workforce readiness, and other areas related to college student studies. He also has served as senior editor of the Journal of Cooperative Education and Internships, and in 2019, he was inducted into the NACE Academy of Fellows for his advancement of knowledge, leadership, and excellence in his profession. We are in for a huge treat today as we glean Phil's knowledge and insights into the current and future recruiting trends that will inform our work. Welcome, Phil. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here. Let me take a minute to set up my slideshow. Sec. Okay, it's good to be with everybody. That was a pretty big Texas welcome, Norma. I'm not sure my hat's that big, but I do appreciate it. Just to get some numbers straight, since I'm a numbers guy, I've been doing trends for 25 years, but I've been the head of the Siri for now 36. Probably it'll end here soon. Anyway, let's move on and let me talk about what I'm going to do today. I certainly want to thank all my colleagues in Texas. I have to say the group down there has been so supportive of this work that I'm doing for a long time. And it's been really one of the backbones of the success of what I do. And I can't thank you enough. I don't think I got every group in here because Michelle kept adding them, but I appreciate the support. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to talk about three major topics, actually. I'm going to talk about adjustments that employers made in the spring as a result of COVID, beginning in late February, both to full-time hiring, and then later in the talk, we'll talk about early talent programs, particularly internships. Then I'll shift to looking at the hiring outlook. And then I'm going to talk at the end about some aspects of technology. We ask a lot of questions about technology, and I'm going to highlight that. So since we're all social distancing, and it's probably not going to end because it's getting to us pretty hard again up here, I'm going to provide you a number of resources. The main report is already available, and if you have not seen that, you can download it from my website at ceri.msu.edu. Then there's a regional report that I have prepared that's just for the South Central Plains region. I'll define that a little bit later in the program. And the attendees that are here today will receive that from Michelle after the program. There's also, Michelle is recording this, and the recording will be available to the associations after today. And finally, I've been asked if the slide deck can be made available. It can. These latter three, though, I'm not releasing to the public, and I asked you for only your personal use until about mid-December when I finish my speaking schedule. It would make a lot of difference. And then we're going to have a really entertaining questions and answers. Bruce really does this really nice. He's all prepared for this. And we have some wonderful employers to contribute some of their thoughts on what is going on. So let me start by talking about last February. I happened to be in Morocco at the time. I thought everything was really, really going well. And when I left, recruiting was going right along as we had predicted in the fall, and everything was happy. And then I was lucky to get home from Morocco. I was one of the last planes out. And when I came back, everything had virtually essentially shut down. And there were some repercussions for that. We found that 25% of employers suspended recruiting immediately and didn't hire anybody, or if they were, a few had to withdraw the positions that they had already extended, about 25%. 75% were able to continue their recruiting and hiring plans with some modifications. Some suspended recruiting and relied on the pool of candidates that they had developed in the fall and early winter before the virus hit. And then another group actually continued recruiting. Most of it was done virtually for those campuses that were closed right away. And they did make offers and extend hiring. So there was a lot of hiring that did go on. Most of the onboarding methods were virtual. They were signed to virtual supervisor or team, and they were onboarded, but there were some other variations that we saw that reported. They staggered groups coming in. Some of them were delayed their start dates, but they were staggered both as and then assigned to virtual teams or more rural locations that were safer at the time. They rotated some of them on site and then to a remote location and back. Some of them split their groups. Some of them that essentially had to work in a facility at a place were onboarded on site. And then the ones that could do their work virtually were onboarded virtually. And then there was a large group that did all their onboarding as normal without any adjustments being made. Now, as I said into the outlook, I really can't tell exactly everything that's going on. The virus is masking a lot of things, dynamics in the labor market. and in the economy in general. We had some weaknesses going in and to the COVID situation, and those areas got hammered. I mean, the most obvious one is the commercial aerospace sector. Boeing was having problems and continue to have problems. But there's some things that are going on that should be send up some red flags and things we should worry about. One, we've lost a significant number of jobs, and we've only recovered about half of what we lost. And then we got some good job reports that then shortly were offset by a fall increase in the request for unemployment insurance. So we really haven't stabilized the labor market to a big degree. And there is concern that a lot of these jobs probably might not come back. And we're going to talk about one sector where that's very likely. You saw the report that came out just before the election about the gross domestic product went up a nice robust 32% after dropping 38% the quarter before as a result of COVID. Unfortunately, the rebound didn't get us back to where we were because you have to do the math right. When we do the math on GDP, it comes off the current GDP, so it was down. And so we had to have a bigger increase to get back. So if you do this on a base of, say the GDP was 100 and we lost 38 points, we went down to 62. 32 doesn't bring us quite back to 90% because you have to measure it off of 62. Interestingly enough, the approach taken in China was able to recoup their GDP that they lost, and they did it by methods that we have chosen not to do in the US. Trade presents a particularly tricky wicket for a number of companies. Their supply chains are not in good shape. They're having trouble getting product or inputs into their processes in the United States, nor they're having trouble getting them out. Despite that, the trade imbalance that we incurred in the last period that it was measured was the largest trade gap in history. We set a record, we being all us in the US, set a record about how much we purchased from overseas. And at the same time, overseas didn't purchase much from the US. So there's a lot of issues going on about this, the trade tariffs and everything. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. We're continuing to buy huge amounts from overseas. And likewise, what's happening is a lot of our major companies are beginning just to build separate activities in China and Europe, and so they don't have to import export, which is going to cost us jobs. There are some sectors under stress. I'm not going to go through all these. Most of you know this. The one that should be most sensitive to most of us here is the last one I mentioned, is higher ed. And the reason for that is the fact that we lost in the first 6 months of COVID, so from March to August, nearly 400,000 jobs. And in no time in history has higher ed ever suffered such a sharp drop in hiring or numbers. And if you look back at 2000, 2008, as more recent periods, actually there was minor fluctuations during the recessionary periods, but there was no traumatic loss. And by the end of the recessionary periods, higher ed actually had higher employment than when they started. But this job loss is significant. It's a precursor of what's going to come in the next 2 years. We're seeing faculty this time losing jobs. We're seeing a lot of contract faculty, adjunct faculty, and a lot of staff. And these jobs will probably never come back. Here is the graph that I've showed you every year since the 2010-11 academic year when we pulled out of the recession, and you've seen the growth in the labor market, and particularly the last 6 years have been really profoundly strong. And you can see that I predicted last fall that, or at least employers suggested they were going to be up another 10%, and things were going along. I put the little jagged line there because I really cannot yet figure out exactly how many jobs the rapid shutdown in the economy in the spring cost the class of 2020. The 25% of companies that withdrew their positions, I really can't get a handle on how many that is, because of the information was incomplete that they sent me. So I'm just estimating that we probably saw a market up 5-6% last year because it was strong going into the fall, and a lot of companies did hire. But based on that, then based on the COVID experience so far and what employers are expecting to do going into this year's recruiting cycle, which began in September and even August, we asked employers how they were going to approach recruiting this year. Now, remember, this survey is taken from in very late August till almost late September. So most people are out recruiting or have made their plans and have started to activate their recruiting programs. So 25% that we're not going to engage in college recruiting at all this year, or we're going to delay our decision and reevaluate how things stand in January and February and see if we're going to do spring hiring. So 25% of employers and organizations that we typically see on campus are not present right now. They are likely from manufacturing, they're likely from some segments, and I'll point this out later, from business, professional, and scientific services. It's engineering related. And the smallest employers are more likely to be delaying and decisions. That shouldn't surprise anybody. But we're going to see some data in just a minute that shows why we're having these tensions in the market, with some groups going one way and the same members that the group going the other way. There's 13% will rely on in-house technologies with very little interactions with campus. So they're going to do all their stuff in-house virtually. They may identify students through databases that they have. And so we're going to, again, you add that in, and we've now got almost 40% of employers that we would have typically been active. We would have seen them either on campus or more overtly at some phase in the recruiting process. We're not going to see them. We've got 44% doing virtual recruiting, but working close with career centers and their campus connections. And then we got a group that 18 that are working closely with campuses, and they love to be in person, and they're opting for any effort they can get on campus. And right now they're all using virtual technologies. Now, there are some underlying currents going on in there that employers talked about, more so than they've ever done before. A number of employers said they were supplementing on-campus with just-in-time hiring. Just-in-time hiring's not new. We've had a long time. It's just that employers said we have a preference for just-in-time hiring while we're doing our supplemental our on-campus recruiting. And we're doing that because we just don't know how the oscillations in COVID infections are going to disrupt our operations. So we want to be able to hire when we need them. We can't hire somebody and then wait 6 months and then have to take the offer away because of COVID. Plus, it takes advantage of something that employers really like, and that's available experienced labor. And they are looking seriously at labor. And on a good note, they're also looking at the class of 2020 because they're immediately available and can start work. The other thing that some employers mentioned was because of the way that work was being impacted by COVID, they were designating full-time positions as part-time. This may not be as appealing to new graduates, and so I'm not sure how much this will affect the total pool of opportunities available. We're seeing some shift from full-time to part-time positions. And then, of course, some employers' favorite activity is poaching. their former interns, co-ops, and student employees that they had worked for them from other companies, and they kept in touch, and they're going to try to lure them away. So for my employer colleagues out there, and you're always, you play this game, you know what happens, but they're interested in doing it again on you. So now we know that who's going to be on a campus, who's out there looking. So what are their plans about hiring? Do they have hiring targets? Are they out there knowing how many people they're going to be looking for? There's 5% that still don't plan to hire, and this is the way this response is set up. Most of those said until we reevaluate. So we don't know if that 5% will be back in the game. 27% have preliminary plans. We've been told what some of our targets are, and that's what we're working with. 27% have definite targets, and then there's 37% that said to be decided. We're actively recruiting, and I just want to point out, we're seeing more mid-sized firms likely to be decided. But look, the smaller firms, if they're hiring, have committed. They're not in this group. There's more from ag and construction. There's supply chain issues. There's things that are causing both sectors, which aren't doing too badly economic wise, except ag is having some problems now. But construction is doing well, but they just can't get inputs, and it's getting very costly and things. So they've had a delay. They've had to spread their businesses out over a longer period of time. Nonprofits, if they're hiring, are committed. They know what they want. What's interesting is 66% of these to be decideds, almost 3/4 of them, are actively seeking talent, building talent pools, talking to kids about full-time jobs, and yet they don't know what they're going to hire. Now, some other information they gave us, it's kind of interesting. 53% said the college library was still good and good to fair, excellent. And they're happy with the overall college labor market. Interestingly enough, that's almost a 40% drop from the last 3 years. I mean, we were at an all-time high, and it's dropped nearly 40 points. On the other hand, is always true, and I love this, is they believe their own sector that they see and they're in is doing much, much better. So 70% said their own sector is good to excellent. That is a 22% drop. So it is dropped. There is concern out of this, but this is not what I would call a crash. There are 41% that are going to decrease their hiring at the bachelor's level, while 36% are going to increase, and you're going to see that 36% is pretty important. The rest are not going to change their hiring from last year at all. They're going to keep it the same. So here are the projections. I'm going to describe this. These are down. The numbers look good, the total numbers, but this is quite off by about 600 or 700 from the last couple of years because of so many people being uncertain about their numbers. You can see here on the right-hand column what the change is from what they reported they hired last year to what they're doing this year. And you can see that the associate market is doing quite well. It's strong. It's not as strong as it has been. And what we're seeing is a lot of substitution going on as employers will opt to hire an associate over a bachelor's for a job and may change the job a bit, or hire a bachelor's over an MBA. You can see that the bachelor's market is down just to 1%. It's probably statistically no different than last year. This is where I kind of called that the labor market's in a swoon. It's not in a death-defying drop, but we just remember we've got so many employers that we rely on to hire that are sitting on the sidelines right now trying to deal with this COVID situation. MBAs are really off, and we'll talk about that. So let me just briefly talk about some of these degrees. I said employers tend to be active for degrees, for associate degrees. You've got to be careful interpreting here because associate markets tend to be very regional. So it's going to depend on their local economic situation. The emphasis is on applied technology, applied engineering, computer science, IT, health. what's disturbing about this is if you followed what's been going on in higher ed since last spring, the enrollments this fall were way off at community colleges. And that's troubling because we do have a lot of opportunities apparently there. And so we need to let students know that they're there. And we need support for students because a lot of the students that are dropping out are from low income, underrepresented families, and they need support to go. And a lot of them withdrew because they just didn't have the jobs and lost the jobs. The bachelor level, let me just reiterate that it's not completely deserted and there's going to be a lot of full-time hiring for new grads. But what we see underneath, and you're going to see in the next couple slides as I talk about it, we're going to see, movement in this K-shaped kind of recovery. We're going to see some sectors and some employers in the same groups going completely opposite ways. I'm also going to point out at the bachelor's level, when you read the big report, that I have a discrepancy in my numbers with what I see in accounting. It's more a reflection of my sample, even though I have a number of public accounting firms, the big ones. If they do come in, they didn't report their numbers. So mine show that companies that are hiring accountants are going to hire fewer people. That doesn't mean they're all going to be counting because they hire more than accountants, but it doesn't necessarily jive with Burning Glass and other sources you may see. So I haven't figured that out yet. MBAs is on their roller coaster. It's been on a roller coaster for the whole decade. It lagged coming out of the last recession. It was starting to improve and then has slowed down. There's been no consistent trend, and this is a significant hit. We also know that enrollments in class, in-person MBA programs has declined quite sharply the last 5 years, 6 years. It's been going on for longer than that. A lot of these programs have shifted to online formats to try to keep their enrollments numbers up. My bottom line here is that you've heard me before if you've been around. Going for an MBA in a down market, unless you have a lot of job experience, is not a sound investment. If you don't have a lot of experience, if you're a brand new college grad, there are master's degrees that work better, that you can do that for, and you probably need to do that for, but MBA is not one of them. And I know all the MBA faculty doesn't like to hear that, but it's an erroneous to sell them that MBAs are something employers want. Employers do value education, but for somebody that doesn't have a lot of experience, and experience trumps the degree. And for people that invest in an MBA at this time, you may not recoup that investment for a while. It may take longer than you expect. Here's one of the issues that we begin to point to this K-shaped kind of recovery. I usually get more consistent patterns when it comes to size. I usually get some really good metrics here, but it is all over the place. Smaller and 100 to 500, and the mid-sized companies to the smaller, large companies are off in hiring. But if you look at those under 99 that are 100, that are small ones that are hiring, the mid-level ones from 500 to 1,500, and the 10,000 over 10,000, that's where the hiring is. Particularly that 500 to 1,499 group of employees is pretty strong this year, but it's not a consistent pattern. And so where you are and where you sit, you're gonna see some dynamics that may not look like this, and I'll show you in a minute. When we look at sectors, again, I'm not going to go through all of these. They're in the report. The business, professional, scientific service sector is critical for college graduates. It looks promising because its overall numbers are up, but when you look inside, most of it's being pushed by two groups: computer science and biological and physical science and social science research. There's a lot of need for bench science right now to run all the COVID tests. and they're strong, as is environmental science, to do a lot of work related to the virus. But engineering services is down quite noticeably, and that they hire a lot of engineers. And the marketing, PR, and advertising is truly K. If the marketing and PR and advertising firms have clients that are doing well, they're doing well. If they have clients that aren't doing well, then they aren't hiring, they're actually having to lay off. Education is an important one. They've been very generous in the past couple years up front. We've seen a big need of teachers. This year, the survey couldn't have been at a worse time for school districts because they were all trying to adjust to how they're going to bring their students back, whether it's going to be online, hybrid, in person, and if they came in person, how long, how all the precautions they would have to take. And so they weren't always, all of them that responded clear on what they're hiring, but it looks like higher education will be very, very strong. Nonprofits, if they have positions, they're hiring, but they're struggling because donations to nonprofits is way down. Government is hiring, and I don't know. They put a lot of comments in until we get the new budgets. Most state governments, local governments are really hurting from revenue losses due to the virus. Other sectors are in limbo. I point out retail looks good in the report, but it's all the e-universe. Brick and mortar isn't faring as well. In manufacturing, some of what affects your area. Food and beverage production is up. Chemicals and plastics, not petrochemicals, are up, but auto aerospace, mostly driven by commercial aerospace, are down and can't be offset by defense aerospace, and metals are off. The only problem that I point out in my study that you should take note is my finance is way off. It doesn't align, and it's not just accounting. I know that insurance is up, but I'm not sure if they didn't give me their numbers. I'm just trying to explore why my finance disagrees. Usually finance comes in and is fairly consistent. So I point out those, it's related probably to a little bit to accounting. So something's going on there that I haven't been able to figure out from the data. So be careful. Now, let me talk about what I call the South Central Plains. It's made up of several states. I couldn't just pull out Texas because then I wouldn't have enough employers. But I take Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and Missouri, and Arkansas. And it may not be any region that you're associated with, but I put those together. They hang pretty well together. Interestingly, almost 70% of the so what I do is I ask who recruits in this region, and then I check to see if they're from that region or they're outside the region. And in your case, the majority of employers are inside the region and of all sizes, and and you have a number of small employers, but you are not a small employer region compared to the Northeast and the Midwest and the West Coast. They tend to have a lot more responses from small employers, but your small employers are going to be pretty important here. Anyway, it fits together. Texas does provide the most employers along with Kansas in this study, and they do hold together. So here's some highlights that you'll see these laid out, and then you can compare them to the national, but 16% did not hire in 2020. So you had significantly fewer employers that did not hire than the national numbers. Your virus situation didn't materialize as quickly as it did in, say, Michigan, which was hard hit right off the bat, and we had to close down and hiring closed down, and we see that in our numbers. 17% are not hiring or delaying recruiting this year in your region, so that's lower, so that's good for you. But you do have 36% that say they don't know who they're doing. Also, just take a note of this because I'm going to talk about interns next. 30% of your employers are not hiring interns this year, or the decision is being delayed, and 24% did not hire interns last year. The hiring is somewhat somber in your region. The associates is up. There's no change in bachelor's. MBAs is down, and all other masters is slightly up. By size, the very small and mid-size are doing most of the lifting. Your small, that 100 to 500, and the very large firms are where they're in a swoon. Now, you'll ask me, yes, a lot of the very large firms are from your area. If there's any states that are poaching out of your area, they tend to be from Washington State. Need I say who they are? And Michigan and Colorado and Illinois are the four big states, and California are the four big states that recruit outside, but they come from all over. Now, the last one line here, I want you to put on you can write this down on a notepad because it's the very last thing we're going to talk about. But I ask, when do you think this COVID is going to turn around and we're going to return to the good days? I call the good days 2018-19 year because kind of last year was interrupted. And 59% of your employers say it's going to take 2 to 3 years. 14% say it's going to take longer. So here's adjustments that were made nationally, and you can see right off the bat how well your internship programs held together. Nationally, 40% of employers could not work with interns or had to rescind their offers. It was very hard in the upper Midwest and of course in the East Coast. It happened so fast, employers, if they were not familiar with virtual internships, they couldn't adjust fast enough. And so instead of trying to figure out how to make that work, they just stopped their programs. Another 27% hired but reduced the number they hosted, and 42% hired as they planned. Third worked virtually, a little less than a third worked on site, and then they had blended rotations, and then they broke up their interns. Some they had a host on site. If it was hands-on production work, they could not do virtually, and then those that could work virtually, they did that. Going into this new year nationwide, 10% are definitely not hiring. I guess yours is a little higher than that, but that's not true. 27% are delaying, so 37% are not actively looking for interns at the moment. I expect, I'm going to talk about this in a minute. 37% plan to hire the same, 12% increase, and 8% fewer. Where this survey missed is the surge in the requests for virtual interns since the latter part of September. A lot of companies have figured out how to make these virtual internships work. Some have had the experience of the summer and now have figured out. And right now we're witnessing a rather rapid rise in internship and work experience for students to do virtual assignments. It won't work for everybody because a lot of companies need people on site, just the kind of work they're gonna and the experience they want for them. We'll come back to this in a minute. So we did ask employers, whoa, what did you learn from your virtual internship efforts this summer, and what made them work? Or what got you frustrated? And this is a review, a qualitative analysis. We're running them through a more rigorous program, but for this talk, this highlights them. The first thing to make it clear that the most important thing is to communicate. It's clearly most important. You have to apply clear expectations for both intern and supervisor. Everything has to be laid out quite clearly. You have to set a schedule for regular touch points, contacts, and a lot of it's being handled by Zoom. You have to ensure a constant structured workflow. A lot of times if you're there on site and something comes up, an intern can be moved to do some other work and then come back to their other assignment later. You can't do that in virtual world. You can't just hand out random assignments when they pop up. It's got to be structured. You have to collaborate, not only between the intern and the supervisor, but all different parts of the organization have to understand what these virtual assignments are doing and how they're connected. And it takes a lot of pre-planning with supervisors. And they found that it's really helpful in virtuals if you assign a mentor for additional support. Now, we're going to go into the technology phase, and I got to make sure I don't overdo my time because I think I can wrap this up in about 15 minutes, Bruce. I asked questions about technology, and we're going to see some more about virtual internships in a minute. So I asked them about the kind of technology role they wanted to play in their recruiting efforts. Most of these questions stem from a number of sessions I was a party to with employers in the spring and early summer as they tried to figure out what they're going to do. And a lot of this was raised, in the discussions. Would they prefer to do one thing over another? So one of the things they talked about is we wanted to only participate in college-specific events, not multiple college events. And so there was a lot of talk about is the ups and downs or the advantages to do this. So 62% agreed that they were going to participate in virtual with college-specific events, one college at a time. But then when we ask them, okay, will you be willing to participate in multi-school events? 64% said yes. So what this captures is a common theme is because of the virtual opportunities that virtual recruiting presents, employers are active in much more arenas than they were under traditional ways. 29% are going to use their own virtual platforms. And rather than going into a college's career fair or a multi-career fair, they're going to hold their own career fair. Now I'm going to digress and use some time here. There's a great story that came out because I just had a meeting with this. This is a nationally known brand. Everybody knows it. But we were talking about this, and what they found was that they could use both their own platform and the platforms that colleges were using to their advantage. So what they did was they found that they would engage in college-specific events at their very select core schools, but they want off their own platform, they're going to run career fairs in regions where they really needed employees, but usually didn't go with actual persons to do recruiting. And these virtual events off their own platform were very, very productive. They hired people that they needed right away, and they got them into their facilities. And so what they're evaluating now is doing more of their own virtual platforms and just maintaining the few key specific ones. But I'm hearing this, and we'll get back to this. They plan to recruit at more schools. Some said they were. Some said they were going to plan at fewer schools. When we asked them what technologies they were using, most of them were using the college and university employment management systems, virtual career fairs, LinkedIn, and through their comments, they would add Indeed here. They also use Indeed quite a lot, employers do, and the usual, we're using social media. So we have employer virtual career fairs, and oh my goodness, virtual fairs was a naughty word up until this happened. They've been around for a while. Students didn't like them. A lot of employers didn't like them. A lot of colleges didn't particularly like to put them on or participate in them. The students complain about them all the time. And so when we ask them the good points and the bad points about virtual career fairs, they sort it out this way. And I think it's obvious why most employers are apprehensive about virtual career fairs. It lacks that personal, in-person connections, the ability to develop an early relationship with a student in a more casual and formal way. has a lot of meaning for employers, and they miss that. Poor technology platforms, particularly on student side, because all students couldn't have access to the internet speeds they needed and other things. And then it really gets frustrating because there's no technology standards. So virtual career fairs, well, poor technology platforms, they didn't find that some of the career fair platforms were old. They weren't supported very well, and there's no standard between them. So if they were going from one event to another on the same day or at the same time, the technologies were different. They complained about attendance. At some ways, it was good at some, but not all. There was not enough promotion. We'll talk about this more later about to students, and their students just aren't ready for these kind of interactions. On the other hand, they talked endlessly about, oh, we've got some real benefits from doing this. There's tremendous, the two that I want to point out, well, there's actually three. Two, tremendous cost savings. There's no cost of travel. There's no cost for the astronomical costs that are for table space at the career fairs they attend. They don't have to move staff around. They don't have shipping costs. The cost savings were huge. It's a better use of staff and professional time. Most companies rely on colleagues from their actual units to come with them to many of their college events and take time away from the office. Well, now they can better utilize. They can come and sit in for 2 hours on a virtual career fair and then go back to work. They don't lose time. They can keep their work going. And believe it or not, they met a greater variety of students than they expected, and they found the qualified candidates that they needed. And as some of them pointed out, we see immediately that it improved our ROI if we do it right. On the other hand, we have virtual internships. This is, again, not new, and we just want to talk a few about the disadvantages. Again, here's another disadvantage, is that these virtual internships don't capture the overall experience that most employers want. It's not just doing a task. It's not just doing the actual components of a job. It's the cultural experience, it's the interactions, it's the connections, it's the values, and it's seeing if you fit. And that's really hard to do virtually. There were problems with technology. Again, students didn't always have the best technology to stay connected, and it was time consuming for supervisors. On the other hand, their advantages of the virtual fair were positive, but it probably didn't outweigh the disadvantages. They provide safe experiences. They had some cost savings. It was a lot of flexibility. And one advantage that they did talk about, and it may be short-term, is that if the student was going back to a situation where they were going to be online and not in class, a lot of those students kept their internships and they were continuing to keep them at work. They're not sure, employers aren't sure if that will be as successful if they go back into the classroom, they begin to socialize with their friends again, and they may not want to allocate the time to the work. But they're hoping that they can keep those pipelines going. Looking ahead, if the spring comes fast enough, 43% want to go back to campus. 58, nearly 60% say we're going to accelerate the use of virtual recruiting strategies. And I'm surprised how few companies actually use data analytics to even plan their recruiting. I've followed this for a long time. Students aren't going to be penalized for a gap year or having to complete their course online in the next couple of years due to the virus. 36% are taking a closer look at credentials and certificates and degrees. There's been a lot of conversation about that among employers. And almost 50% said most of the assignments in the future will be remote or virtual. What's going to stick? You know, how much of this is going to stick around? Well, there's one group cluster that says it's too early to tell, but there will be changes. We just don't know what. There's another group, each one of these is about a third, that says that it's going to all return to normal. It's all going to go back the way it was. We'll be fine. And then there's the bigger, I guess this group is bigger. It's the blended group. It says we're going to see a more balance between virtual and in-persons. Students have to accept the fact that many of the steps of the recruiting process will be virtual. So this is going to be a blended recruiting season. And within that group, there's another smaller group that says, one, we hope that this blend will build a better sense of trust among employers, colleges and universities, and the students. And out of it, we hope there'll be enough incentive to get much better virtual technologies. Having said that, then it's going to change our relationships between colleges and employers. And so we asked them, we're analyzing this with some qualitative tools so we can get a better analysis of this and get it out. But here's some of the points that were made over and over again. The use of virtual technologies is going to allow for better communication. They talked about communication a lot. It's going to open more ways to stay connected, have timely conversations, to stay informed. And we're going to have to stay informed. And through that, we're going to have to collaborate better and have better relationships, because we're going to need to keep abreast of what's going on campus and open channels to students and student organizations as we shift to this virtual world. We're going to have to all be more proactive, innovative, and creative in the way we work together, because now we're going to use new tools, and employers are going to be looking for ways to engage in new and different ways. And they have two concerns or statements for the college career centers. One, they are going to hold the college career centers or the college and universities responsible to train, educate, coach students on how to use virtual interfaces, how students can better research organizations, prep for interviews, and engage employers, and be willing and open to engage employers in new ways. Biggest challenge then, the biggest fear they have is they have doubts if career centers will be up to the effort to require to build and sustain these type of relationships. Part of it is their anticipation that career centers are going to be hit again with budget cuts and staff reductions. Most of you aren't experiencing that yet, but you don't know if that's going to happen. If you read and follow the Chronicle, you know that they say the first year of any downturn, we don't get hit. It's when we go into the second and third year. We're seeing significant shifts now in talks about employment and what to cut, and you're seeing it all over the map. So schools that were hurting are going to get really hurt. And then some of us that have escaped so far may have lost open positions and not get them back. We haven't been told to cut, but that may not be viable, and employers are worried about that. So that brings me to the last thing last two things. What's going to happen? Well, you can see there that 61% say it's going to take up to 2 years for things to return to normal, and 30% say 3 to 4 years. This recovery from COVID is not going to be instantaneous. We're not going to get a V-shaped recovery. We're not even going to get a Nike swoosh recovery. It's going to be a laborious process. Some people are going to do absolutely splendid and sound like everything's roses, and other people are going to struggle. Finally, we asked students, I can't believe I have so thankful employers. They get through these surveys, and this one was really short compared to most of my surveys. And we asked them to provide insight to students about how to deal with COVID. And the length of comments was overwhelming, and I'm just touching upon them, but it's mainly they're saying plan, prepare, and persist. You must be flexible. And that was the most talked about thing. Flexible, and you must be open-minded, not only to the opportunities that are available to you, but the technologies you have to do. And you better be very, very up on technologies, because you're going to be required to use them. You're going to have to accept them, and they want students to know that. With that, Bruce, I'm going to turn it over to you. We'll go off the slideshow here so that we can see all the panelists and everything. So let me end the show and turn off my thing. Whoops. Let me go back. There we go.
Okay, very good. Yeah, thank you,
It'll work
Dr.
out,
Gardner. Fantastic information as always. Thank you so much. I mean, that's just great insights and tools to help us manage the future. Before we jump to our panel, I think there was one question in the chat box. What is the added value career centers can provide to employers regarding recruiting and internships, virtual and such as that? But I think your last slide kind of outlined some of those opportunities for us to just really support employers and building
I
those
think there's a lot,
relationships.
I think there's a lot of opportunities for as we move forward in a new environment where no things are going to change, and that's the time to be creative and innovating. I think coming out of 2008, career centers were much more innovative and in a lot of different ways than they've ever been before. This is just going to push those that can to a higher level. I can't answer everything about what's the right thing to do or what they were. I think it's going to evolve over time and we'll just see.
Yeah. What about these virtual fairs? You know, many of us are still using those to generate a little revenue for our offices. Do you think we're going to get pushback on the fees that we're charging for that? Will that push employers
Well, I think, we lowered our fees quite a bit. Employers haven't balked at that, but I mean, to come in person was expensive. I think a lot of employers, as they become familiar, particularly if the platforms become better. They're talking about Brazen a lot. Brazen is one that they use in-house. They're okay with Handshake. It was put together fast, but they're okay with, they did say have some pretty cool comments about Handshake, but some of them are antiquated. So what they really expect out of this is somebody's going to step up and really build the kind of platform that they want for virtual career fairs. I think enough employers understand that they need to support career centers because most of us have to generate employers that way. But if they can avoid paying $3,000 to $4,000 or $5,000 a table at career fair and come in at a reasonable price, they're going to probably do that because then they're going to shift their time and to do different things with students and see in different ways. And there may be some revenue ways to produce to generate there that we don't aware of.
Okay, very good. Okay, well, everyone stay with us. We're going to have a continuation of our discussion here this morning. We have a fantastic panel of a couple of employer representatives to talk with. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Bruce Howard. I'm a career advisor here at Texas State for the McCoy College of Business. And we're really glad to have this extra time to dig into a little bit more of the topic today. With us today are two really fantastic allies of our profession. First gentleman, Mr. David Ong. He's the Senior Director on Talent Acquisition for Maximus. That's a big professional services firm based out of Virginia that considers their mission of helping government serve the people. So he is very deeply involved in that. He oversees activities in university relations, diversity and inclusion, veteran affairs, as well as disability recruitment. Prior to joining Maximus in 2004, David would manage the campus recruiting programs for Capital One, Citigroup, and Booz Allen Hamilton. So a deep background for him. He has served in several leadership capacities for the National Association of Colleges and Employers, NACE, as we know it. Has completed terms on both the NACE Board of Directors and as Vice President. And also, he is now officially the President-elect for NACE and just got that this summer. He is a graduate of the University of Richmond. In addition, we have Ms. Christine Hickey with us. She's the Senior Relationship Management Specialist with UFCU, or University of Federal Credit Union. She's been there for over 15 years and responsible for managing their student success programs, which includes their internship program, their UFCU Scholars Program, as well as a student savings program with ACC. She started in California. She was a work study student, actually, in the financial aid office at UC Santa Barbara, where she kind of learned the ins and outs of financial aid and provided information and coaching to other financial aid students. She got her degree there in 2002 in psychology, and then moved to Texas and began working for UFCU in 2004, and has worked in their community impact business unit since 2014. So these two folks have joined us today. We're going to ask them some questions a little bit kind of on topic about what we've been discussing, and then we'll hopefully have time for maybe questions, one or two from the audience. So let me kick this off with, let's just go, straight to the heart of the matter. We've just heard all this fantastic kind of State of the Union report from Dr. Gardner. Panelists, what changes in recruiting do you think are here to stay? I mean, you've seen some of these opinion polls of where we're going or what we're going to do. What, from your perspective, what do you think is here to stay? Dave, we'll start with you.
Sure. I think that several of the trends that Phil did such a great job of outlining, I do believe are going to be around for a while. There's no question that the COVID-19 environment accelerated something that was already in play already. It was obviously the move to digital technology. And I think that with more and more employers trying it that had never done it before, obviously those that were still recruiting in February, March, April or so had to lean on these technologies and realize that, you know what, you can do interviewing and have it be a decent enough experience for these folks. You can use Zoom and all these collaboration tools and Teams or so to create some type of candidate experience. Obviously, it's not the same as doing it in person, right? It's not the ideal situation, but when you weigh all the other factors that are involved, such as cost, say, for example, such as time, I look at the ability, say, for example, of these virtual career fairs, which I will admit, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of them, but I can find some pluses in what is sometimes a lousy situation in terms of having to use them, right? I can be smarter with my resources. I don't need as many people going to a career fair, say, for example, or traveling to a career fair to be able to cover what could be a 5 or 6 hour long career fair. So I do think that digital area, as more and more employers try it and see the cost savings involved, particularly over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, I don't see that going anywhere.
Yeah, it looks like you're probably going to vote on the blended side. We're going to do a little bit of both. So, Christine, how about you? How will this affect your world?
Yeah, I agree with David. I think for a lot of employers, it's going to kind of come down to the ability to have a cost-benefit analysis where, for those farther reaching campuses, it takes more time to get there, more time for shipping or more cost for shipping and things like that. They'll have the option to do it virtually instead. And so, it kind of expands their reach potentially, saves them some money. And so I think it's just going to kind of come down to giving everybody more options. And so it's just going to depend on each individual employer to look at those options and weigh it for them. So I agree. I think it's going to be a more blended world out there going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. The famous words, it is what it is. So I think we just have to adapt and adjust and keep going. So let's kind of bring it home a little bit. So how do you all think this shift in recruiting is going to affect the relationships with the career centers? What's going to happen there with regards to the partnerships that you have with career centers in the future? Let me start with David again on this one.
We need your help, folks. I think that there are so many ways that career centers can really be pivoting to assist employers in terms of making the right decisions. And I think that we can also talk about in terms of helping students make the right decisions. Obviously, that's been your primary focus as career services folks. But I do think there's an opportunity here. And I know that several of you on this call have actually done this, in that when, say, for example, a lot of companies were talking about moving in March to some type of virtual environment for the internship program, I was surprised how few employers that I know chose to contact their career services partners to find out, is this doable? Or how is this going to fly? How is this going to affect our brand? And I think that utilizing career center professionals, they understand this stuff better than anybody. Using them to consult on certain major decisions, I think would be a huge way for you all to add additional value and provide a different value proposition to employers than maybe what you've been doing before, right? I look at the fact that there are certain skills that students, we're seeing, say, for example, negotiation skills. that I think were always a little, little thin before COVID-19, to be honest with you, is that I don't know that we've seen a lot of students take a very refined or necessarily a smart approach to how they negotiate their offers. I've been very surprised at what's the right way of putting it, the lack of sophistication in the way that students are trying to negotiate post-pandemic, and that they're asking without really having any good reason to be negotiating. And that I don't think it's a great idea in this market to be asking for a 20% increase in salary when you have no other offers to compare with, right? And we're seeing a significant amount of that right now. And granted, we do think that everybody has a right to negotiate an offer, but there are smart ways to negotiate an offer and not so smart ways. And we're seeing a pretty fair amount of the not so smart ways. And again, I think that's something that career centers can certainly be helping their students with. And we as employers, I think, need help in terms of making sure those students are hearing that messaging.
Yeah.
Let me turn over to Christine. I'm sure she has some ideas as well.
Yeah, no, very good words. I mean, it just, one word comes out of this: partnerships, right? We're in this together. It's the job of the career centers to support and engage both of our constituent parties, employers and students. So Christine, how about you? Where do you see this going into the future?
I think maybe a refocus on the relationship management aspect of all of our positions, both on the career services side and the employers. I think with being more in person, we've kind of all taken that aspect for granted, or it's just happened more organically. We see each other at the job fairs, we pass each other at the various events, and it kind of just happens. You don't need to, have a focus on that, make time for that necessarily. And the same thing with the students. I mean, they go to a job fair, maybe to go to see a particular employer, but they pass by 10 other employers on the way, and they just they'll stop and chat with them. And that's not really as easy in a virtual environment, or possible sometimes, I think. So I think just a refocus on the relationship management kind of aspect and making more intentionality behind that, so that we can continue to grow those relationships and develop them. And as David said, maybe then think of reaching out when opportunity arises, instead of just kind of hoping that it'll happen.
Yeah, very good. You have to make some intentional plans to
Right.
participate.
And Bruce, can I add one thing to something that Christine said? Just really sounded something off in my head, is that if you take a look at the employers that spend the most amount of time at your campus historically, the ones that are there every year, that are there for every event, they've lost a competitive advantage if you think about it. They had an advantage because they were there on campus all the time. They got to meet the stakeholders, the decision makers, the influencers. There was a part of their strategy that was really just built into the fact, if we spend a lot of time here, we will get the saturation of the campus, we'll get the brand with the students, but that advantage has disappeared.
Yeah.
So I think that helping we employers in terms of figuring out how do we create creative strategies that are actually going to help us find the students that we're looking for, and getting in front of those students. That's another thing that I think that the career services offices are in a much better position to advise us on than they were before.
Yeah, no, very good point, Dave. Absolutely. Okay, so here's a scenario for you guys. You're staring at your computer screen, and all of a sudden you see this inbound call coming from the CEO. And you click and open that Zoom, and the CEO says, "Hey, tell me what you think this new normal is in college university recruiting." I mean, so how would you describe that to your senior management? Christine, I'm going to let you go first this time.
I think probably the first thing that jumps out into my head is it's a lot more tech focused. I mean, previously, as you guys said, it's more in person. Even the smallest employer could probably put together a plan to go attend some job fairs. They got some flyers, they got some swag, they're good to go, and they can participate and be on campus. But that's it's very different now. And I think it's going to be a lot more technology focused, utilizing virtual platforms, different ways of engaging students are all going to be virtual. And so I think that's how I would probably explain it to him if he called me up and said, we're gonna need to look at more tech, and we're gonna need to gear up more tech.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, buy more bandwidth, right?
Yes.
Absolutely. Dave, what would you say?
Well, I literally had that situation happen last Wednesday, so I can actually speak from direct experience. My discussion with our CEO was that I really think that we need to look at the next 12 months in college recruiting as a superb opportunity. Being a mid-sized company, we're pretty decent size, 30,000 plus globally. But if you look at our brand relative to a lot of the other large firms that are out there that way outspend us when it comes to campus recruiting, we're oftentimes at a disadvantage in terms of how we brand. But luckily, our business, thankfully, has found ways to pivot to ensure that we are going to be in a position to do a significant amount of hiring out of college campuses next year. There are certain programs that might be paring back a little bit while we actually ramp up other programs, but there's clearly going to be a lot of activity for us. And my discussion with our CEO is that this is a great opportunity for us to really upgrade on talent in certain areas, that we really could be buying talent that we haven't had before. And it was interesting. The discussions came around to, can we find ways to triple or quadruple the size of our internship program next year to provide opportunities for those students that lost part-time jobs on campus, that are going to struggle to actually finance their college education as a result of those things. They lost federal work study positions. How can we position ourselves to be identifying that talent and then creating internships in local communities where we haven't really had internship programs in the past? And I got to tell you, he was loving all of this discussion. And there are going to be several follow-up discussions in the next couple of weeks as a result. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's it. I mean, to be in a position where you can be the pioneer, to lead, design, be the one that people are starting to say, look what they're doing. That's going to have to be very valuable. So that'll help. That'll help students. It'll help employers, recruit too. Let's get into the weeds a little bit. Did you guys do any virtual career fairs? What's a quick feedback on that? What did you think about those when you participated in those? Dave, how about you?
I'm old school. When I was listening to my bio, all I could think about was, God, I am old. And I see people on this call that I've been working with for 20 plus years. I see Lad Flock at UT just laughing hysterically at that comment because I think he's known me my entire college recruiting career. But, I think Phil really put it very, very succinctly. The idea that it really did vary by platform. I haven't talked to any of my peers that felt like the experience was better than doing it on site. And I did hear the same issues around technology. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. If you look at just our numbers, from what I'm seeing, we just did this summary about 2 weeks ago. I think that we saw a pretty decent decline in terms of the number of attendees, which I thought was interesting. I actually thought it might go up slightly, but it didn't correlate with our applicant flow, which I think is the big data point. I know Phil is the data king over there, but we saw nearly a 250%, 300% increase in applications across most of our positions over the course of the last 12 months or so. So career fair participation didn't really seem to affect that one way or the other.
Before I go to Christine, give us one tip that we can share with our students, how to better perform in a virtual career fair.
It's tough to give you one piece of advice, Bruce, because I think the problem here is that because the platforms were so different, right? You had Handshake, which was giving a very specific 10-minute window, right? So you've got a very structured period of time you have to work around. Whereas Simplicities, I think, and I don't remember all these because I only did 3 or 4 of them, Simplicities felt a little bit more like a standard career fair. So you could have a more organic discussion. So I think the way you prepare your students, I think, does have to do with the amount of time that you're given or the way that these different things are structured. And I'm not sure if students understood that. Frankly, I don't think employers understood that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so I think it put you all in a very, very difficult situation compared to most other years. So
Yeah, we've all learned a lot, haven't we? I mean,
Yeah.
career services professionals, employers, students. I mean, we just all kind of finding our way through here.
Right.
Christine, did you participate in any career fairs, virtual fairs?
We did. We participated in several. They were all through Handshake. So that was most of my experience. I would agree with David. We saw a significant drop off in engagement with students at the career fair. You know, I'm used to talking to, you know, hundreds of students during a career fair, whether they came there to see us particularly, or, you know, they just stopped by our table as they're on the way to another employer. And you lose that for sure, especially in the format of having to sign up for the one-on-one or the group sessions. I got the impression, and I don't have any data to back this up, but I just got the impression that students they're tired of being on Zoom. They're tired of participating. So they were just signing up for sessions with their top employer choices. And so those employers that maybe don't have as much branding on campus or smaller, they were kind of getting left in the dust, unfortunately. So I think that was my biggest takeaway, is that it's harder to pick up those walk-bys or those students that maybe aren't sure about you or don't know you. Or they're tired. They've been on Zoom all day and they can only stand to go to 2 group sessions. So they pick their top 2 and then that's it.
Yeah, no, that's very good feedback.
Yeah. I mean, my worry for career centers, Bruce, while on this topic is that, and again, Phil touched on it very eloquently before, is that I do think you're going to see a significant amount of employers that are going to explore other options.
Mhm.
When you look at the cost benefit analysis, the idea that we didn't really see a significant drop in cost for career fairs. And granted, that's not something that we're overly concerned with, to be honest. We're not going to think that our ability to go to a career fair is not going to be significantly changed because somebody decides to drop the price by $200, say, for example. It's just not that big a deal for us, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
But when you look at the overall numbers, the idea that from a time standpoint, would we be better off sponsoring 2 or 3 of our own career fairs nationally, as opposed to focusing on 15 or 20 local career fairs at respective schools? Like, would our results be any different? And I think that the fall made us question whether or not that's something we should be looking at. And I know several employers that have already said that either they were going to sit out the fall totally, or they were going to test it. And the ones that tested, a lot of them are saying that they're going to start thinking about creating their own career fair tools.
You lose that competition, essentially. If you're hosting it, then there's nobody else there. They're all there to see you.
Right.
Yeah, we kind of got a little taste of that prediction about a year or so ago too, that, you know, we might start seeing employers go solo or something like that. Yeah, I guess a lot of experimentation may still be the case in 21, especially with, you know, the attitudes we heard from Dr. Gardner about when are we going to get back to whatever good old days, you know, is. I mean, man, kind of bearish on that, 3 to 4 years and that kind of thing. So, virtual internships for you both. I mean, yes, no, all virtual, blended. Where do you think you're headed, Christine?
I think with USU's culture, we're very relationship based. I don't think we'll stick to virtual 100%. I think as soon as it's safe to do so, which who knows when that will be, I think we'll want to go back to an in-person internship. The feedback I got from all the interns is that while they loved the opportunity, they loved it, it would have been better in person. And so, you know, they were understanding in the situation, but I just don't see that it would be as good in a permanent virtual situation. So I think we'll probably go back to in person eventually. Though I did like the fact that, you know, we had a couple of interns that ended up having to move, you know, back home when their lease ended and things like that. And we were able to keep them, where in that situation, if we're in person, we probably would have had to let that intern go prior to the end of our internship. So there is definitely some advantages to being virtual. You can have students not necessarily in your city for the whole of the internship or at all for the internship. But I think just given our culture, I think we'll go back to in person when we can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Dave.
And it's interesting because we are very definitely an in-person culture as well, but we made a decision very early on in COVID to go virtual. We knew by about the end of the third week of March, I think about the 25th, 26th or so, that we were just going to scrap any illusion of doing this in person and just realize, let's go virtual. We're going to have to try something new here. And for us, it actually worked out just as well. And in some ways, I might argue a little bit better, to be honest. So we're about 99.9% sure that we're going to go virtual again for this summer for that same reason, is that I would much rather be in a position to make the early decision to say we know exactly what we're going to be doing so that we can have the time to refine the internship. And we actually got a lot of accolades for having made the decision very early because it forced us to get more creative in terms of managerial interactions. It forced managers, I think, to be much more intentional with assignments. And Phil mentioned the idea about fit, about there are a lot of employers that don't like the idea of these internships being done over virtual tools because they don't get an idea of cultural fit. I actually love the idea that we take cultural fit out of it, to be honest with you. Because I think doing the virtual piece, you're really focusing on the work first and foremost. And I think the ability of for somebody to do a job, I think actually gets magnified more in certain aspects when you do this kind of virtual internship. So I think there's a certain level of fairness and a certain amount of equity that I think happens as a result of it.
Yeah, yeah. Needs to be strategic and customized, famous words. It depends. Depends on the
to your point, we actually did one thing that the most common complaint, and we did see some decrease, to be totally transparent. We saw probably about a 35 to 40% cut in terms of the number of interns because several managers just said, I don't have the bandwidth to do this virtually. And we got it, totally understood that. But for those that said we're going to do it, they said their biggest concern is how do I keep an intern occupied for 40 hours a week and engaged, because they're not going to have a buddy to turn around to ask a question, say, for example. They can't walk into their manager's office. So we started thinking, how are they going to develop certain personal skills without having the same kind of handholding that we had before? And we actually decided to do something we've never done before, is that we decided to kind of outsource some of that, if you will. We actually identified about 3 or 4 local nonprofits that we've been working with our corporate foundation, all of whom lost their internship programs because of lack of funding for the summer. And we said, each of these nonprofits, pick a project that you think would go over 10 weeks that we could lend our interns to about 5 hours a week. And let them develop some solutions.
Yeah, beautiful.
It created a level of self-direction that we don't always have in the internship program. And I think that's one of those skills that new hires are going to really have to learn in the post-COVID environment, is how to adapt to the fact that they may be working on their own a little bit more often. They may need to be more self-directed.
Yeah.
And if you look at, the success story out of that, we've never made the way up top 100 internship programs till this very year. And the reason they picked us out, quite frankly, was because of that program.
Yeah.
So
that's got to be very attractive generationally too, to have that type of opportunity to participate in a good cause. Maybe we have time for one question for our panelists. Does anybody have something they just want to unmute their mic? Lad, go ahead. Just unmute and ask the panel.
Can never miss a chance to unmute my mic. So thanks for having my question. My team, we're spending about 3 to 4 times more effort in promoting information sessions and employers attending career fairs than we've ever had before. And we're often having to rewrite a lot of the employer announcements so they're much more persuasive to engage students to take action. My question is, why aren't employers changing the way they post positions or the way they describe positions for this new environment? Because frankly, we don't have the bandwidth to rework all these promotional items and we know what students will act on now. So my question is, in terms of the teams that are doing the promotion for info sessions and career fairs, Are they rethinking, or are they being creative, or are they just sticking to what's worked in the past? That's just why I want to throw that out there.
Christine, you or me, ladies first. I'll give you the option.
Well, I mean, I suspect that it could potentially be a bandwidth issue on the employer's part as well. I mean, I know for UFCU, we've typically for those kind of pieces relied on our marketing team to kind of help create those and come up with those. But they're busy building a COVID resource center for our members and, rebranding all of our marketing materials to talk about that and coming up with marketing for skip-a-pays and things like that. And so I suspect that could be potentially part of it for some employers. And so somebody who's not a marketer or taken on that task in the past is being left to do that. And so they're just probably, going with what they've done in the past and leaving it alone because it's one thing that they don't have to mess with, or that's just not their cup of tea. And so they're not comfortable coming up with a marketing pitch for materials to send for a job fair. So that would be my guess, is that I think there's a capacity issue on both sides for sure.
Yeah. Completely agree. I mean, I think that the info session is still that, elephant in the room that nobody really wants to talk about or address, because it's one of those things that I really just don't believe transfers well from the live in-person thing. And frankly, I've hated the standard info session for 7-8 years or so. We made a change at least 6 or 7 years ago where instead of doing the standard dog and pony show with a formal presentation, we changed it to an open house where we actually just invited students to stop by for 15 minutes during a 3-hour period of time, and we would just engage them in conversation so they could ask the questions that they had and not have to sit through a long drawn-out presentation or listen to everybody else's questions. Right? We tried to create something very custom. We're trying to figure out how do we recreate a similar type of experience, not doing it in person. And we're not convinced that Zoom is the way to go. So for us, it's still, we haven't really figured it out yet. In regards to the job descriptions, I think you're probably going to see a lot more video job descriptions going forward. And I think that would be a good thing. That's something that we're looking at, say, for example. So should we use Instagram Live, say, for example, to give job previews? Or do we need to go out there and work with one of the videography companies out there that does create these custom video job profiles? So yeah, I think you're going to see more of that over the course of the next few years or so. I'm just not sure that enough employers are there quite yet.
Yeah. Well, it's all a crystal ball, isn't it, everybody? And we just kind of one of the things that we should all be proud of is that we all are on the same mission. One way or another, we're all preparing the talent for the future, and we collaborate and continue to learn from each other. Really want to thank all the support and participation for the production of this event this morning, the various consortiums that have supported and assisted with this. But a special big thank you goes to Norma Geyer and the University of Texas at Austin. They've been so consistently supportive of this. They stepped up and provided key sponsorship financing so that we could produce this event for everybody today. We're going to wrap it up there. Big thanks to Dr. Gardner for hanging in there. We owe him a plate of barbecue and some tacos, and so maybe we can get him back down to Texas next year. And please respect his request on the publications. You guys are going to be able to get the copy of this. I think we have the PowerPoint available to you too, but please remember some of that's not out yet in public. Michelle, any final words or housekeeping?
No, that's it. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and we will see you at the next event.
Okay. Dan, many thanks again for the University of Texas at Austin and Norma Geyer. Thank you, Norma, for helping us put this on. Hook 'em horns, go Bobcats. Everybody chase down your mascot, and best wishes to close out this year on a good note. In 21, we'll figure it out. Dave, take care. Thank you. Christine, thank you for being with us today. Great panel discussion. And we sure appreciate your participation too. Norma, any
Thank
last
you.
words or are you good?
I'm good. Hook 'em.
Okay.
Thank you for having us. Norma, you owe me some barbecue.
I do. And Phil,
you.
some Mexican food.
I work for food. Bye, everybody. Take care. Be safe, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.